He's just ready.
Welcome to the March 14th, 2022 meeting of the Sandusky City Commission. We will have an invocation offered by Commissioner Waddington, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. But prior to our invocation, I would like to ask for a moment of silence in honor of Officer Andrew Dunn. Officer Dunn gave his life while serving this community 11 years ago this week. We continue to honor his life, his service, and the lives of all those men and women who keep us safe. Commissioner Waddington.
Okay. Before the prayer, I'd like to ask for just a real short prayer for a former commissioner that passed away recently in the last few days, John Fenton. He was a commissioner from 1996 to 2000. God our Father, as we gather for this meeting this evening, give us guidance, wisdom, and to make the proper decisions. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Myers, will you call the roll?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Harris.
Here.
Mr. Meinzer.
Here.
Mr. Poole.
Here.
Mr. Murray.
Here.
Mr. Brady.
Here.
Mr. Pajali.
Here.
Mr. Waddington.
Here.
Commissioner, do you have before you the minutes of our meeting of February 28th, 2022? What is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Pajali.
I move that we accept the minutes of the February 28th meeting and dispense with the formal reading.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Without objection, that motion will be approved, and hearing no objection, those minutes are approved. Residents with comments regarding tonight's agenda, please step to the podium and share with us your name, address, and your agenda comments.
Thank you, President Brady, City Commissioners, staff. Three items. The first item, I'll combine, Tim Schwanger, 362 Sheffield Way. Items 2 and 3, the question would be, once we get to the public hearing, is if the paper trail pertaining to that $150,000 2020 CDBG substantial amendment, if the applications and the grant recipients would be subject to public record requests so that the public can see where the money went. Item number 6, which is the Owen Sound Transportation Lease Agreement for the Jackson Street Pier. The original agreement, does the city have a commitment from Owen Sound that the Canadian vessel will begin operating this year from the Jackson Street Pier? And also maybe an explanation on the payment now is going to be $400,000, a one-time payment this year of $400,000, an explanation on that compared to the original it was supposed to be $114,000 a year and then escalating after that. And item number 8 and number 9, number 8, which is the $1.8 million contract for the reconstruction of Meigs Street from Water Street to Washington Street. This includes a redo of the water and sewer capacity, which means bigger lines, water and sewer lines. And I'd like to know what role the redevelopment of Battery Park played in that decision, especially the water and sewer part. I understand the reconstruction of Meigs Street, it's horrible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwager. Additional comments on agenda items from the public? Seeing no one rushing to the podium, I'll presume we have no additional comments. We have the privilege of swearing in 2 new firefighters this evening. Chief, if you would present the candidates, I think Mr. Webster does the swearing in.
Poke some holes in it right now, because it won't go through.
Congratulations. I will start by reading this. I'll break it into 3 clauses. When I stop, just read up to the point that I stop. Please raise your right hand. I, Cole Good, recognizing my fundamental duty as a firefighter of the City of Sandusky Fire Department, do solemnly swear to uphold the standards of my profession by safeguarding the lives and property of your citizens against the threat of fire and disaster.
I, Cole Good, recognize my fundamental duties as a firefighter of the City of Sandusky's Fire Department. Do solemnly swear to uphold the standards of my profession by safeguarding the lives and properties of our citizens against the threat of fire and disaster.
I promise to obey the duly constituted laws of the United States of America, the State of Ohio, the City of Sandusky, and to accept the badge of my office as a symbol of public faith, leadership, and trust, to be honored for as long as I remain a firefighter of the City of Sandusky Fire Department.
I promise to obey the duty, Constitution law of the United States of America, the State of Ohio, the City of Sandusky, and to accept the badge of my office as a symbol of public faith, leadership, and trust, to be honored as long as I remain as a firefighter of the City of Sandusky.
I will continually strive to serve our community and to be an influence for good before my fellow officers and firefighters, to the best of my ability, so help me.
I will continue to strive to serve our community, to be an influencer for good before my fellow officers and firefighters, to the best of my ability, so help me.
Congratulations and welcome aboard, Stacey.
Told you.
You've done that a few times.
He probably drew new shirts. He probably drew blood when he did it.
Please raise your right hand. I, Chase Green, recognizing my fundamental duty as a firefighter of the City of Sandusky Fire Department, do solemnly swear to uphold the standards of my profession by safeguarding the lives and property of our citizens against the threat of fire and disaster.
I, Chase Green, recognize my fundamental duty as a firefighter of the City of Sandusky Fire Department. Do solemnly swear to uphold the standards of my profession by safeguarding the lives and property of our citizens against the threat of fire and disaster.
I promise to obey the duly constituted laws of the United States of America, the State of Ohio, the City of Sandusky, and to accept the badge of my office as a symbol of public faith, leadership, and trust, to be honored for as long as I remain a firefighter of the City of Sandusky.
I promise to obey the duly constituted laws of the United States of America, the State of Ohio, the City of Sandusky, and to accept the badge of my office, symbol of public faith, leadership, and trust, to be honored for as long as I remain a firefighter of the City of Sandusky Fire Department.
I will continually strive to serve our community and be an influence for good before my fellow officers and firefighters to the best of my abilities, so help me.
I will continually strive to serve our community and to be an influence for good before my fellow officers and firefighters to the best of my ability, so help me.
Congratulations, Jay.
If it's okay, President Brady, I'd like to just give a little background on the two new hires. Cole Good, he's a Perkins graduate. He worked part-time for Margaretta Fire Department prior to getting hired by Sandusky. He will be filling the vacancy that I opened up when I was promoted. And he will be on number 2 shift with Captain Matt Lesh as a shift commander. Chase Green is also a Perkins graduate, and he previously worked for Perkins Township Fire Department for 2 years, part-time. He's going to be filling the vacancy that Jeff Danovich opened up when he retired, and he'll be on number 1 shift with Captain Resch as his shift commander.
Thanks, Chief. These are the best kind of days you can have when we can welcome 2 young people into a department that has such great tradition and long history. The expectations for you are to uphold the kind of tradition that's been set by our present employees and the former firefighters. You are joining a very elite group of employees, and we thank you for taking a chance on us, and we thank you for your service. And I'll also tell you that None of you have the obligation to sit through this entire meeting. We're going to give you 2 minutes to exit the door, and I would suggest you take it.
Can I go too?
You got to stay.
Congratulations.
We have 2 public hearings this evening. The first is on CDBG 2020 substantial amendment presented by our program administrator, Nicole Groy. Nicole, the floor is yours.
Good evening. Tonight I'm going to talk about our substantial amendment for the fiscal year 20 plan. This is the second public hearing for this. There is only one proposed amendment for the fiscal year 20 annual action plan, and that is to change the Community Development Block Grant COVID Small Business Assistance Program to a rental and mortgage assistance payment program as illustrated below. Previously, the Small Business Assistance Program was budgeted for $150,000. It's proposed that that $150,000 be moved to rental and mortgage assistance payment. These funds must be used to prevent, prepare, and respond to COVID, or the coronavirus, and the process for changing the fiscal year 2020 action plan requires that a substantial amendment process be followed. So just briefly, program proposal, what is it? Is proposed that for fiscal year 20 through the CDBG program, Small Business Assistance Grant Program be amended to the rental and mortgage assistance payment program. And the purpose of this change is to assist residents who are in need and are facing homelessness. So many local businesses have previously received funding or have been offered the opportunity to apply through the city for COVID relief funds, while assistance to local residents has been limited. Under the proposed program, those who qualify can receive up to 3 months of rent and mortgage assistance. And the applicant must show that they live within the limits of the city and are facing homelessness due to COVID. How will the program work? It will be administered through the Community Action Commission of Erie, Huron, and Richland counties. The CAC staff will collect the intake forms and manage the program. They will receive 10% of the $150,000 to support their administration of the program, and the remaining funds will be directed to eligible residents. Staff estimates that there will be about 100 to 150 people assisted by this program, and that the funding would be spent within 6 months from the program's kickoff, and it should begin soon. So we didn't receive any public comments on this. To answer Mr. Schwanger's question, it will be public record, any applicants that we get, any of that information. If anybody has any questions or comments on this, they can contact me above. And you guys get to have me for one more presentation if nobody has any questions for this.
Is this a public hearing? We welcome comments from the public regarding this portion of the presentation, if there are any, or comments from commissioners, if there are any.
I just have a question.
Commissioner Poole.
With regard to the public records, what's the process? These are records that are going to be basically held by the recipient. So what's the process that people have to go through again?
I'm going to be meeting with the CAC Friday, and we're going to discuss details about those types of things, but I would assume you would request the records from CAC.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any additional comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington.
I was at your meeting that we had a few weeks back. I left with the thing, what's going to define homelessness when they do this? Do they have to have, is that got to be valid, or how do you buy that?
All right, so the CAC, they have a current program up right now, and they have a waiver that defines what homelessness would be or how you're impacted by COVID. So I'm assuming that's what we'll be using for that determination.
And in the 3-month rental period, can they reapply, like if there's, it's just a one-shot?
It's a one-shot deal,
Okay,
yeah.
okay, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Lamarca, step to the podium.
Tom Lamarca, 206 48th Street. My only question is, why is it 10% of the funds being charged as an administrative fee by the CAC. Don't they have their own budget to write checks? I mean, $15,000 to write a handful of checks, it just seems like a lot of money to me. Thank you.
In response to your comments, I would like to say that there's a lot of administrative work that goes with that. They actually have to do income verification. There's a whole process. So it's a lot more than just writing a check. They're receiving that money.
Additional comments or questions?
Yes, for the record, Tim Schwanger, 362 Sheffield Way. Can Ms. Groy go over the process to apply? Like if the public's watching right now, a little bit more information on who to contact, how applications are processed, that type of, thank you.
Ms. Groy?
So, as I said, I'll be meeting with the CAC Friday, and we'll discuss that, but I'm assuming it'll be online just as their program is right now. Once we get that squared away, I will definitely make sure that we get it up on our Facebook page and let the public know how to apply for those funds.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole?
I'd just like to add something. When you mentioned online, a large number of people that don't have money
Yep.
don't have access to the internet. And
Yeah.
so, you know, I'm voting to say yes to do this ahead of time, but if this is going to be set up so that people don't have access to it, do we have options after that? If they're
Absolutely, yeah. This was mentioned before. The applications are going to be available by request. If people need a hard copy, they can call my number. They can get a copy from the lobby. I'm going to put some out there. We'll make sure that they get a
That's
hold
the
of it.
CAC's forms for requesting.
Yes,
that you're
yeah,
talking
and
about.
we'll have them here too.
Does this, since this is our CDBG money, does this apply to just Sandusky residents or?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Additional comments or questions? Not, I'll declare this public hearing closed, and we'll start the next one. Second public hearing on CDBG 2022 Action Plan. Again, will be presented by our own Roy.
All right, so our next public hearing is going to be about the 2022 action plan. So this is the coming CDBG year. Just briefly, I have some information about what the program is. The Community Development Block Grant Program is a program that we have since we are an entitlement community in the city. So we receive funds directly from HUD, which is the Housing and Urban Development Organization. And with these funds, the city is allowed to carry out various activities as long as they meet any of the 3 objectives listed by HUD. So those 3 objectives are they must benefit low to moderate income families, aid in prevention or elimination of slum and blight, and community urgent need due to a disaster. So the fiscal year 2020 is actually on a federal calendar. It will start June 30th of 2022 and end July 1st of 2023. This year, the city anticipates approximately $799,000. And under this grant, there's certain requirements that can't be exceeded. And these include the following. I'm going to round numbers because there's a lot of numbers in this presentation. 70% must have benefit, 70% must be benefited by LMI households, so $559,000. 20% max of that budget can be for program administration, which is $159,000. 15% can be budgeted into public services, which is the different sub-recipient applications that we have. We actually have some of them online right now, and they're also in the lobby if anyone's interested. I'll talk more about that in a minute, but that's $119,000. So just a quick timeline where we're at. I actually had a first meeting with the Citizen Advisory Committee. That was March 1st, and that is when the subrecipient applications became available. Anybody who is a nonprofit can apply for that, and I'd be more than happy to help you if you need help with that. Those are due on the 21st. The draft plan will actually be done on the 22nd, not the 23rd. And there will be a 30-day public comment period that happens after that. And then there will be another Citizen Advisory Committee meeting, and then in April, that'll end, and then I'll be here again in May, and we'll have another public hearing to go over any comments received, and then hopefully we'll pass the plan. So briefly, this is where we're at with our 21 plan. And I wanted just to mention that these numbers may seem higher than what they really are. Some of these funds are already, they're not spent, but they're in the process of being spent, or they haven't been billed, so they're not as high as they appear. So for program administration, last year there was $120,000 approved. There's been $37,000 spent, and there's $82,000 that needs spent by June 30th of 2022. For our fair housing activities, there was $10,000 that was approved, $5,000 has been spent. There's a $5,000 balance. For public facilities, there's $331,000 that has been approved, $160,000 has been spent, and there will be about $19,000 carried over. So the 2019 means that these were from our 2019 grant year, if that makes sense. And then if you're going to carry it into 2023 because we didn't spend them is what I was trying to denote here. For acquisition, there is $104,000. Sorry. And that was from 2020 funds, and there's $17,000 that was spent during that process. And in 2023, there'll be $87,000 that's carried over. For code enforcement, there was $100,000 originally allocated, $36,000 has been spent, $63,000 needs spent by the end of the year. For youth programming, $22,000 was originally budgeted, $7,000 has been spent, $14,000 needs spent by the end of the year. Our strategic plan, there was $20,000 spent for that activity. There has not been anything spent. I don't know why I put $20,000. That's a mistake on there, but that's going to be carried into 2023. The Center for Cultural Awareness, that was one of our sub-recipients, like I mentioned earlier. They were awarded $10,000. They haven't spent any of their funding yet, but they have $10,000 that they need to spend by the end of the year. OGO was another one of our sub-recipients. They received $40,000. They've spent $22,000. They have about $17,000 left. Meals on Wheels is the Erie County Senior Center, received $40,000. They spent all their funds for this year. And then rehab was $67,000. None of those funds were spent. They'll be carried into 2023. So any remaining funds that are left over with the asterisks behind it will be put into clearance and demolition because that's what's listed in our 2021 action plan. So our subrecipient applications are now available, and they are on our website, and they're in the lobby or by request or email. They are able to be turned in through the 21st. Last thing I have is just a recap of our COVID funds. It's not necessary for this program, but I added it anyway. I thought people would like to know where we're at. So for COVID funds we received in 2020, they're good through 2023, just to clarify. So program administration, there was $87,000 approved. There's been about $1,000 spent. There's about $86,000 that still needs spent. For public works, there was $100,000 approved. There hasn't been any spent yet, so we'll have to spend that balance. The mortgage and rental subsistence payment program, which we just talked about, that's $150,000. Nothing's been spent on that. That'll be spent fairly soon, I believe, after we kick it off. Our food pantry program, that consisted of different subrecipients. This one was Second Harvest and Victory Kitchen, and that was $50,000. So far, we spent $34,000, and there's $15,000 left. Our food pantry program 2, that's various other food pantries. That includes the Boys and Girls Club, OGO, and some other organizations. There's some local churches in there. Excuse me, my throat's getting dry. So we've spent $15,000 there, and there's about a $60,000 balance. On OGO, they received $15,000. They've spent all that money, so that money is accounted for. Youth programming, $50,000 was approved, $34,000 has been spent. We have $15,000 that still needs spent. Stu. For the fire station HVAC equipment, we had $34,000 that was approved. That's all been spent. Excuse me. All right. So COVID prevention equipment, we also did that. There was about $14,000 for that. $14,000's been spent. Meals on Wheels, same with earlier, they've spent all their money. $30,000 that was allocated. So this is just a general overview of where everything is. And again, this is my contact information. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Comments or questions from the public or commission? Ms. Croy, Piers have got a lot of money to spend in a short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
You anticipate much of that rolling over into the next calendar year? The need seems certainly to be there. Are we going to be able to get that money out the door?
Yeah, and some of the activities, we definitely are going to roll funds over, but for majority, we're going to try to spend them down. Like I said, lots of the funds we've spent, we just haven't really billed back yet.
Okay.
So I
The
understand.
administrative dollars do not roll over, though, that we get compensated.
They will,
for what-
the COVID ones will stay,
COVID's
yeah.
do, but the other ones do not.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Additional comments or questions? Public or commission?
I do.
Commissioner Poole?
What happens to administrative funds that aren't spent? Say they don't roll over?
They stay, they roll over to the
Oh, I
next
thought you
year.
said they didn't. Okay,
No, the public service funds with the asterisks,
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the 799,000, what was the allocation from last year?
it was 5% less than that. That's how I calculated it.
It's
so.
5% less?
Yes.
Oh, and the only reason I ask is if it was trending down, if they were starting to chop away. at
No, this is the 799 is 5% more than last year's.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Additional comments or questions? I'll declare this public hearing closed. Thank you, Ms. Croy.
Thank you.
Commissioners, you have before you several communications from staff recommending various pieces of legislation. Can I have a motion to accept these communications?
So moved.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Without objection, that motion is approved, and hearing no objection, that motion is approved. Commissioners, we have 3 items on the consent agenda this evening. Do any of you wish to move any of these consent items to the regular agenda? Ms. Myers, will you present the consent agenda?
Yes, Mr. President. Item A, requesting approval to submit Ohio EMS grant. Item B, Fire Department Training Academy Agreement. Item C, Software Solutions Incorporated Annual Fee.
Commissioners, having heard these ordinances, resolutions, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Harris.
make a motion to accept consent agenda items A through C and declaring that all ordinances and/or resolutions as drafted and presented to the City Commission under the consent agenda shall take effect in accordance with section reflected in the ordinances and/or resolutions, whether it be in accordance with section 13 or 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Myers, will you call the roll on the motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the ordinances and resolutions.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Those ordinances and resolutions are passed. Turn to our regular agenda. Ms. Myers, will you present item number 1, please?
Item 1, it's requested an ordinance be passed authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into a purchase agreement with the Bishop of Toledo for the acquisition of real property located at the Mills Creek Golf Course, Sandusky, approval to terminate the lease agreement dated June 24th, 1999, and declaring this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meiser.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Mr. Holliday, I wonder if you would give us a brief overview of what we're accomplishing here.
Certainly, Mr. President. Members of the commission, as you're aware, we have for many years leased a large tract of land from the Catholic Diocese for the operation of our golf course. Specifically, we lease approximately 35 acres for portions of about 4 holes out at the golf course. The current lease was entered into by the city in 1999. It was a 25-year lease, In anticipation of the expiration of that lease in May of 2024, we began a series of conversations late last year with representatives of the diocese, and I'm pleased to be coming before you this evening with the opportunity for us to purchase this land that has been leased for many years from the diocese. We have negotiated a purchase price. The purchase price was informed by multiple appraisals that have been conducted by the city. We anticipate closing this transaction with your approval this evening, and I should mention, the transaction is still subject to approval by the diocese, but with their approval, we anticipate closing this transaction and taking possession of this land by May 31st. At that time, the lease that we have in place will be terminated. That will relieve the city from making the last 2 payments on the lease. The purchase of this property will result in long-term cost savings for the city. It'll also provide the city with the certainty of knowing that we own and control the golf course. That'll put us in a better position to be able to do capital improvements going forward. So at this time, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have and encourage you to pass this item this evening.
Comments or questions for Mr. Holliday, Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Harris.
I was just curious if Mr. Holliday could offer the public just some numbers, just so they kind of have something to go off of. Just
Certainly.
in terms of savings and things of that nature.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, to the councilman, the purchase price that we've negotiated is $365,000. Currently, the city leases the land from the diocese. We have 2 remaining payments. They are each around $35,000, I can say specifically. The payment due this June is in the amount of $35,120, and the payment due next June is $35,998. So if we were to enter into a similar lease with the diocese, you could roughly calculate that we'd have a break-even point of about 10 years. So one way to look at this transaction is that by proceeding now with the purchase at this amount, we have a break-even point of roughly 10 years. There's a lot of other numbers that are available, and happy to go over those if
Mr. Holliday, in addition to that lease payment, there is another component in there that makes this attractive, and that is we are relieved of the property tax burden that befuddles all of us why there are property taxes on this property, but I don't think we've ever gotten absolved of that payment. And I know that is, this last year was $4,700. So you add another $4,700 onto that savings and it becomes significant.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Meigs.
You know, when I first got on the commission in 2006, this lease payment came up and I was like, what? Why are we leasing half the golf course? And it's just been a thorn in my side this entire time. I've been looking for the day when we could purchase this. We've tried over the years to have some conversations, and we just didn't find any receptivity. Fortunately, we've got a local advocate, Father Monty Hoyles, who's been an intercessor on our behalf, and we've had good conversations with the diocese. And we have finally, after all these years, been able to secure a good long-term solution, purchase at a fair price. So this is an important asset to the city. I'm glad we're purchasing it. The diocese could have just said, no, we're just going to keep charging you rent and increase the rent. And very much appreciate the cooperative spirit that they demonstrated in moving forward with this. By the way, just a little quirk, one of the questions that came up is, why is the property in the name of the bishop? Well, every single Catholic church, Catholic cemetery, every property owned by the Catholic Church is in the name of the bishop. That's just how the Catholic Church does it. So that's why we're buying it from the bishop, but we're really dealing with local representatives.
The other alternative to not purchasing it and not being able to negotiate or enter into another lease is to have a 5-hole golf course. And I can tell you that my scores would dramatically improve if that were the case, but it would probably be an asterisk next to it. Additional comments, Commissioner?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Waddy.
I'd also like to add that St. Mary's and Sandusky High both have boys and girls teams there now, so that's going to be nice that they don't have to go out to Wasika or go over to Thunderbird to play, or Plumbrook. I guess they were doing some of their practices there, so I think that's going to be an opportunity. And then I know the Lunch Bucket Gang will be thrilled if this does pass as far as the regulars that go out there, so.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray.
one other point you might mention about the money. The money stays local because there's a cemetery fund to take care of the Catholic cemeteries, and it's been pretty well depleted. This money goes into that fund for maintenance of the local, the St. Joseph's, and then the one that's right next to Mills.
Thank you. Additional comments or questions, Commissioner? Ms. Myers, you call a roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
That ordinance is passed, and we're in the golf course business. Ms. Myers, you present item number 2, please.
It is requested an ordinance be passed amending ordinance number 22-003, passed on January 10th, 2022, approving a substantial amendment to the city's fiscal year 2020 one-year action plan for the Community Development Block Grant Program year of July 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2021, and authorizing and directing the city managers to submit the amended action plan to the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance pursuant to Section 14.
Second.
And a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Myers, you call roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, item number 3, please.
Bless you. Bless you.
It's requested an ordinance be passed authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into a sub-recipient agreement with the Community Action Commission of Erie, Huron, and Richland counties for the administration and implementation of the rental and mortgage subsistence payment program, and to expend an amount not to exceed $150,000 from the fiscal year 2020 Community Development Block Grant Funds, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Myers, you call roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, you present item number 4, please.
It is requested an ordinance be passed authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into a contract with United Survey Incorporated of Oakwood Village, Ohio for the 2022 sewer lining project, and declaring this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance pursuant to the city's charter, Section 14.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Murray.
I'm going to support this legislation, and I really love Mr. Snyder's work, but as long as he doesn't repeat the presentation regarding slip lining, I'll vote yes.
We really are appreciative of that presentation, and
It was very good.
I agree with you, Mr.
It's
Murray.
exhaustive.
I did some very quick calculations regarding cost, and it appears that we spend about $225,000 for a mile of this slip lining. Mr. Klein and I had a conversation this morning regarding the cost of doing it the other way, which is digging the street up and installing new pipe. Comes out to be about $4 million a mile. So it's pretty dramatic savings. We use the numbers to compare this to what we're going to be doing on Perkins Ave, which is about a mile. And the validity of this process is unbelievable, and it is encouraging that it's not a situation where you only have one bidder. We got 3, maybe 4 bids for this, and they were all very tightly grouped together, so it tells me that we're getting value for our dollar. And again, thanks to Josh for that fine presentation a month or so ago. Additional comments or questions, Commissioners? Ms. Myers, you call roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes,
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
that ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, you present item number 4, please.
It is requested an ordinance be passed authorizing and directing the city manager to expend funds to Core and Main LP of Ashland, Ohio for the purchase of materials and parts for improvements and repairs to water service infrastructure in calendar year 2022, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meigs.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under Section 14.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Mr. Klein, pretty typical piece of legislation here that we've seen before.
Yes, Mr. President, this is something that we started maybe 5 years ago. After the O&M budget is passed, the operation budget is passed, we lump the core and main items together in water distribution. This allows us during a main break to go out and get hydrants and other parts that might exceed that $10,000 limit that the city has. This is something it's been very helpful because we've also been able to install meters in various sections throughout the city. And in this case, we're doing south of the tracks between Columbus and Pennsylvania Avenue. So we'll be getting moving on those things, and this will help our crews continue to do the work as needed throughout the city. Now, I do want to say that if there are times when we're not in a main break or things like that, we do still seek competitive pricing and go through that process. This is usually used when we have to replenish or restock after one of those items.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. Comments or questions, Commissioners? Ms. Myers, will you call roll on the motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes,
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
that ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, you present item number 6, please.
It is requested an ordinance be passed amending ordinance number 20-126, passed on August 24th, 2020, authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into an amended lease agreement with Owen Sound Transportation Company Limited for the utilization of dockage space at the Jackson Street Pier, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meigs.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under Section 14 City Charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Mr. Klein, I perceive this as very good news. It's taken a long time to get to us.
Yes, unfortunately, Mr. President, back in 2020, when the lease was passed, City Commission passed it. We sent it off to Owen Sound, who's the operator for the Ministry of Transportation in Ontario, and they decided they weren't going to sign it, even though we had negotiated the lease the way it was. So we went back to the drawing board, and one of the things, to answer a question previously, was one of the things that we told them if we were going to go back and renegotiate that we wanted more front-loaded. We were not going to be accepting that $114,000 a year. We wanted the $400 right up front. We were originally thinking that that would be in '21. Unfortunately, it lasted longer. They had a change in their administration, and it got pushed to now in '22. There's really not a lot of things that change in this lease from the original one that was passed in 2020. Another question that was asked earlier is a commitment from them to bring the vessel here. So what I'd like to say in regards to that is they are still planning on bringing the vessel. Still working out a date. What happened during construction of this project was they had originally planned to bring the GMON. As the project went on, they changed their minds and said, no, we're going to bring the Peely Islander. So we had to do an about face. That was a vessel that was side-loaded, bringing it in straight, and they had to change and now be able to back that new vessel in. Of course, COVID hit, they couldn't bring the vessel until this past November. So then that's when they did that test fit to make sure that they could load and unload safely. So they've figured out that they're very comfortable with loading passengers safely. The question is whether they need to do additional work or whether we need to do additional work to unload the vehicles or load and unload vehicles. Because the way that the mechanical lift that's out there, that ramp that's out there works, is it was lined up perfectly with that larger vessel, the GMON. It's not lined up with the Peely Islander as it would back in, so it needs to be askew a little bit, meaning that there needs to be a couple stop piles that are installed so that they can tie off and safely load those vehicles. This is something that we've been pushing them for 2 years to make sure that this was installed, but they couldn't get a vessel here to figure out exactly where it needs to be. We did talk to them earlier this week, told them that any additional work to allow that to happen was something that we were going to work into a lease and they were going to pay, we wanted them to pay for it. They agreed to do that. They're trying to get me a set of plans that we can bid out here in the near future. I'm hoping to have it at the next commission meeting. If not, then it'll be the first one in April. And then we can bid that project out, go through the details of getting that installed. They also told me this week that they'd like to do another test run to make sure that it happens, that they feel comfortable before they make the decision. So unfortunately, we're at the whim of them. They do plan on bringing the vessel. They're aiming for April 29th. We don't have a confirmed date yet, but they're talking about internally whether that's going to be passenger only. Now, that being said, my understanding in discussions with them is people that have vehicles can still get the vehicles over going up around Lake Erie, coming in through the north. They just can't get them because of the Peely Islander won't be able to accommodate. So with that, they do want to get payment to us before the end of March for that $400,000, and I know Ms. Reeder is very happy about that. So,
Comments or questions, Commissioners? Ms. Byers, you call roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Byers, you present item number 7, please.
It's requested an ordinance be passed authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into an amendment to the agreement for professional design services with Stantec Consulting Services of Cleveland, Ohio for the Mills Street High Rate Treatment Project and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Murray.
I'd move for the adoption of this ordinance pursuant to Section 14 of our city's charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington.
I'd like to ask Aaron if, is there, at the last meeting, we mentioned a UV disinfectant system that the tubes are, it's going to be done at the end of 2022. Is there anything new on the horizon for disinfectant that we could use? Have we ever looked in a new process?
Yes, sir. Through the President, Commissioner Waddington, we have, Unfortunately, if you do certain things like ozone, it's just significantly more expensive. Other things require chemical treatment. And going through this process for even the Mill Street highway treatment, they keep asking about chemical treatment. Can we do this? Can we do that? I don't like the fact that we would be bringing more chemical trucks on our streets, that we would have chemical tanks next to the playgrounds and to the ball fields over there, next to the boat ramp. It's just, I'm trying my hardest to stay away from those chemical treatments. They might be significantly more cost-effective, not even significantly more cost-effective, but more cost-effective in the short term for capital, but you're then paying it in chemicals and the risk that's associated with that just did not outweigh it. In those discussions with the consultant during the high rate treatment process, we analyzed it specifically for that project with the knowledge that we already have a UV system and we were going to need to add something else. And it was pretty much unanimous that it didn't make sense to change to a chemical treatment process. So.
And then the follow-up, what's the shelf life? Didn't we discuss that, like 10 years? Is that how long the last system lasted?
Yeah, so through the president, the last system lasted, I don't recall exactly how long it was. It was more than 10 years. That was the last time that there was upgrades to the system. I think it's been about 15 to 20 years since that system was originally installed. But what this project is going to do is we've added to it not only the high rate treatment, but we are going to have them design the UV system to replace the existing system, in addition to the piece that would be going with the Mill Street high rate treatment. So we did get some cost savings on design, and we're expecting to get cost savings on construction as well. And I can get you that information on the age of this one.
And one last thing, I'd still like to see retention ponds. If there's some way we could configure them, it's a lot cheaper than running this through and, especially stormwater, running it through our system. I think that's very costly. Thank you.
Additional comments or questions, Mr.
Chairman.
Commissioner Murray.
Mr. Klein, I get the sense that this is a very large project. We have $2 million of design work. I don't know how large a project we're looking in terms of construction, but any kind of ballpark in terms of what that expense is likely to be?
Yes, the cost right now, the estimate that they have right now is somewhere between around 18 million.
Okay.
I'm trying to get it down, but that was a number towards the end of last year. So I'm trying to see if we can still, if there's areas that we can save costs, we're reducing on building footprints and things like that.
So where is this facility going to be located? I'm not really clear on that.
Yes, through the president. This facility, we've been trying real hard to make sure that it stays within the existing fence line of the wastewater treatment plant. Right now, if you look out, there's the Sproul ball fields that are out there. There's two on the western side, and there's one on the northeastern corner just north of the playground. We're able to get this entire facility within the footprint of the wastewater treatment plant inside the fence. The hard part is going to be having staging areas for equipment and machines and stuff like that during construction. So we're working with the ball fields and with everybody else to see if that ball field, we might be able to relocate it over to the field that we purchased previously and get that field built up over there so that they can continue their operations and use exactly the way it was. So next month, we're going to be getting with the Parks Department, with the leagues and everybody that are out there to make sure that they have continued operation. And that was why we purchased that property previously, because we wanted to make sure that we did not impact the rec leagues or anything that's going on in that area.
Thank you.
Mr. Klein, you and I know what is driving this kind of cost. I wonder if you would share with the public so we have on the record what we don't want to spend $18 million just because we want a new treatment center. There's something else to this.
Yes, and I'll get a little bit into the history about our discussions with EPA, in that back in 2015, we negotiated with them on a series of projects, 5 different projects that we agreed to. That totaled somewhere in the range of about $36 to $38 million. they wanted us to do 86 to $126 million just for those treatment processes. And what the intent is those combined sewer overflows that you see signs throughout the city along the waterfront. It's to not necessarily even eliminate those, but reduce them and minimize those as best we can. This project in particular, which is the last of that series of 5 projects, is expected to capture about 73 million gallons of water and treat it before it goes into the bay. We don't know until it gets constructed and we do some more monitoring of the system exactly how the system's going to respond. We did do modeling a couple of years ago. We plan on doing modeling when this project is over again, just to see where that is, because we are going to have to renegotiate and have another discussion with EPA. And at that time, we're hoping that everything we've done makes as big of an impact, including things like what Mr. Waddington is talking about, doing green infrastructure and detention and retention. And we're hoping we can do those things in the future and push off those extra $86 million that they're trying to get us to spend. So if we can get this one done, get things looked at, hopefully we can reduce and minimize those future costs that they're trying to get us to do.
Comments or questions, Commissioner?
Mr. Chairman, I noticed in Mr. Klein's narrative, he talks about possible reimbursement through a low-interest loan for some of this or all of this. What would the interest rate be, and do you think it's a good candidate?
Yes, through the President to Commissioner Pajali, the interest rate, usually we do these through OWDA. This one is going to be going through WPCLF, and the interest rate on that is, I don't remember the exact number. It's about 1% less than what we typically get with OWDA, and I'd have to look into that and get back to you. One of the things that we're being a little more unique on this project is that we are going to be what's called sponsoring an environmental improvements project in Claremont County, which that's the intent right now. And what happens if we sponsor or basically tell them that we like their project, then what happens is we could get a reduced interest rate, 0.5%, another full percent, depending on where their project comes in, and then that difference, that money that's left over, goes to them for their project. So we're hoping to not only get the normal rate that we would get for this, but also even a more reduced rate on this. So a lot of that discussion still has to take place, and we'll find out hopefully around August or September of this year.
Mr. Klein, you'd be financing both the legislation we're talking of tonight at a later date, the engineering, and you certainly would be financing the physical improvement to 18 million.
Yes, sir.
Additional comments or questions, Commissioner? Ms. Myers, you call a roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, you present item number 8, please.
It is requested an ordinance be passed authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into a contract with Underground Utilities Incorporated of Monroeville, Ohio for the Meigs Street reconstruction and multi-use path project, and declaring this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman, I move for the adoption of this ordinance under Section 14 City Charter.
Second.
Motion on the second, discussion. Mr. Klein, again, this is your opportunity.
Yes, sir, Mr. President. So Meigs Street, now that we're scared off of Meigs and into downtown because of the condition of the road, we're going to go out there and fix it. This project not only includes sewer separation and water line work. The water line will be between Washington and Water Streets. What's interesting, and I may have brought this up previously, is that when the water treatment facility was located at this exact location, there was a smaller main that headed north on Meigs, and the larger main headed south on Meigs. Well, when the treatment plant was relocated to where it is currently, there was one improvement that was made farther south on First Street to accommodate, and there's a 20-inch that runs all the way up to here. Well, then it necks down to a 12-inch at this location. So this is really the bottleneck for that section of town. And as we were going through this project, as we do with most of our projects, we try to make those underground improvements before we tear out all the concrete and put something back. So that's what we're doing here. There will be a bike path along the west side as well between, this is the Sandusky Bay pathway.
East side, right?
East side, sorry, east side. And west confused. So on the east side between Water Street and Sycamore Street where the hook artwork is. So we're very excited. This is the next phase of the pathway. So we're excited to get moving on this project. And the hope is that we can get the underground completed as quickly as possible, get out of the way as quickly as possible, and then just have the resurfacing through the summer. So we're hoping to complete this project by June or July if possible.
Mr. Klein, a question from a resident regarding the engineering that went into place for this project, that based on any single project that drove this? Do we have our finger on a scale on any of these things?
No, this was something that obviously as we go through these and we're looking to replace underground infrastructure, we will work with new developments. We'll work like even through Old City Hall and the Justice Center about what additional accommodations might be needed for potential future development. So what we did here is because we are removing their drive aprons into their facility and putting four-way intersection at Market Street and a three-way intersection or four-way intersection at Water Street, that's their new drive entrance. We're also incorporating new water and sewer connections for them as well, and making sure that there is enough capacity for whatever happens at that site.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. Additional comments or questions, Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meigs.
I think this will be for Mr. Klein as well, but does this 12-inch bottleneck, eliminating that, alleviate any of the back pressure on the 5th Street, Marlboro, Buckingham, Ogons area? Does that route that way, or?
Through the President, this would not affect that area, but
That's
it
different.
will affect basically downtown and west of downtown as well.
Thank you.
Additional comments, Commissioners? Ms. Myers, you call roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Harris?
Yes. Mr.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, you present item number 9, please.
It's requested an ordinance be passed authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into an agreement for professional services with K.E. McCartney and Associates from Mansfield, Ohio, for contract administration and inspection services for the Meigs Street reconstruction and multi-use path project, and declaring this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meigs.
I move for adoption of this ordinance under Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Mr. Klein, would you share with us why we're not doing our own inspections here and we're paying an outside firm to do that?
Yes, sir, Mr. President. So this money is coming from the federal government through ODOT, through the MPO, to the city of Sandusky. There's a lot of stipulations that come with it, a lot of record keeping, a lot of monitoring, full-time monitoring, things like that. So this is something that it's important for us when we have those ODOT funds on the project. We want to make sure that we're following all that record keeping. It's very time consuming. Plus with one inspector and with Warren Street coming and Perkins Avenue coming later this year and the slip lining and everything else, we want to make sure that as they're doing underground work, we have somebody on site full time.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. Comments or questions, Commissioners? Ms. Myers, you call the roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, will you present item number 10, please?
It's requested an ordinance be passed authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into an amendment to the agreement for special event producer for the 2022 Summer Concert Series at the Jackson Street Pier and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meigs.
last summer, I think, was a hit, so I think that was a big draw down there, weather permitting, so this seems like another good idea.
We are fortunate to have offsetting $50,000 donation, I know, from the Lang Trust towards this also, so we are continue to be indebted to that trust. Additional comments or questions, Commissioners? Ms. Myers, you call roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Abstain.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Abstain.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray.
if I may, just explain, I abstained, and I'm sorry, I should have mentioned it when we were discussing it, but I abstained because we have a business relationship with Mr. Ernst and his company. They lease the property next door to us.
Thank you, Ms. Murray. Ms. Myers, you present item number 11, please.
Yes, Mr. President. It's requested an ordinance be passed authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into a 2-year agreement with Pizarski Enterprises LLC, DBA Bay Lawn Care, for lawn spraying services at Mills Creek Golf Course for calendar year 2022 and calendar year 2023 seasons, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington.
I move for this adoption of this ordinance under suspension in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meigs.
just because I've not seen this on the agenda before, or remember it, is this something that we used to do in-house that's contracted out, or is this something, a new contractor maybe, or bid?
Mr. Whirling, perhaps you can answer that question for us.
Oh, it's a rec.
To Commissioner Meigs, through the President, we used to get bids, and now that the cost of this has gotten over $10,000, it's something that we wanted to bring to the commission with your approval.
Used to do it before it was less than 10 grand, didn't have to come before us.
Yep.
And I'm going to presume that this is one of those items in a golf course as small as we are. Well, we got 34 acres bigger a little while ago. But in a golf course as small as we have, it's not efficient for us to have a greenskeeper that does the spraying himself.
Correct. And Mr. Pizarski Bay Area has done this for us in
Very
the past.
familiar with our property. Thank you. Additional comments or questions for Mr. Whirling? Ms. Myers, you call roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, you present item number 12, please.
It is requested an ordinance be passed allowing for the sale of Sandusky Police Department K-9 Officer Gunner pursuant to Section 25 of the city charter, approving the retirement of K-9 Officer Gunner and authorizing the sale of K-9 Officer Gunner to his handler, Sergeant Evan Estep, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Harris.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
A motion and a second discussion.
Sure.
We're losing Gunner. Commissioner Murray.
I was just going to comment, I remember when the the kids were involved. We went to the schools. They had a contest, a naming contest for the dog, and that was just a great way for the police department to reach out to the local schools and the kids. And the kids really responded well when he was named and came to the city, and it was a nice event. I think it was over at Tofts, if I remember correctly. So it was a nice occasion. I think that was only about 5 years ago. No?
9?
If I may, he's been in service to the police department since 2014.
Wow. It flies.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
going on
Okay.
8 years.
Yeah.
Been a great asset to our department. I agree completely about the name and how the name is chosen, and that's what we intend on doing with our next K-9.
Thank you.
Awesome. We will have a next K-9 though.
We do. We intended on doing this late last year. We've received some very generous donations to our K-9 account from a couple different businessmen. We've been in the process of purchasing a second K-9. So we have a K-9 in service right now, K-9 Vigo. K-9 Gunner's still working until March 30th. Starting middle of April, we've identified our new handler. It's going to be Officer Elijah Coe, and we're purchasing a K-9 from a business out of Columbus where he's going to go train with that K-9 for 5 weeks. The 6th week, they're going to test on certain things to pass certification for the state of Ohio, and then he'll be in service by end of May, hopefully.
Additional comments or questions, Commissioner?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Pajala?
I was just curious, Chief, how long do you usually get out of a service dog? Like,
You'd like to get anywhere between 7 to 9 years is kind of where it is. It's kind of a reach, though. Ultimately, it comes down to about 5, 6, 7 years in that ballpark, depending on it. But Gunners, again, been great.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go rest with Sergeant East up at home.
Commissioner Meigs?
I'd just like to make a suggestion to Chief Oliver that we get to meet all the police candidates and fire candidates. I'd like to meet the next K-9 officer I think that'd be kind of cool to bring him in
I
here.
think we did that with Gunner.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
I
It
haven't
was
been
pretty
around
cool.
long now. Good.
Bringing our new one.
Yeah,
Like I
good.
said, hopefully Memorial Day, he should be ready to go in service.
Great, great.
I don't want to pin the badge on that.
Yeah.
No, not on a police dog.
Mr. Myers, you call a roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
yes.
Mr. Waddington?
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed, and our thanks go to Gunner and his handler, Officer Eastep, for their wonderful service to this community. Mr. Myers, you present the next item on the agenda.
Yes, Mr. President. It's requested an ordinance be passed authorizing and directing the city manager to purchase 3 2022 Ford Utility Police SUVs through the State of Ohio Department of Administrative Services Cooperative Purchasing Program from Montrose Ford of Akron, Ohio for the police department, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray?
I move for the adoption of this ordinance pursuant to Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meister?
I remember when we bought the last group of SUVs for the police department, and, I mean, it was somewhat lower. It was a great price, but still at $33,000 for an SUV, that just seems insane to me. That seems like that's half of a vehicle, I mean, in today's world, so I guess you got to tip your hat to Montrose Ford and Akron for getting involved in the cooperative purchasing agreement because they can't make a dime on this thing, so just a community
Mr. Chair.
service.
Commissioner Waddington?
Maybe now I can take a ride, Chief. I got in the Cruiser years ago. Mr. Orzak probably remembers with Dawn Allen. And we got out of the park. I squeezed in. You know, I'm big and got some arthritis going. But she pulled out of the driveway and she says, "This is going to be 4 hours." I said, "Second thought, just take me back and drop me off." So there you go. I was doing a facial. There's just no way I could ride. Yeah.
Those Impalas compared to these Ford Explorers are very tiny. So let's replace 3 of those, and we'll have 1 Impala left in the fleet. The rest will all be Ford Explorers.
Okay. Good deal.
Additional comments or questions, Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman,
Meiser?
I don't think Mr. Waddington could have chased anybody down, but if they'd have brought him back to the car, he could have squished their face or something.
Mr. Myers, will you call a roll on the motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris? Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes,
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
that ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, you present item 14.
It is requested an ordinance be passed authorizing and directing the city manager to accept grant funds in the amount of $12,180 from the Ohio Department of Development through the TechCred program for the reimbursement of training to upskill the city's workforce, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Harris.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole.
just whoever is doing this, an idea of, if there's a list on the background information of things that this can be spent on, just what we have, who we have plans for utilizing these funds.
Mr. Harris is here. I wonder if you'd share with us some of those specifics, Mr. Harris.
Happy to, through Commissioner Brady to Commissioner Poole. We have been awarded two grants for environmental stewardship, wastewater treatment. We have two grants for industrial electricity training, two grants for industrial welding short-term certificate, two grants for fiber optics boot camp, and one grant for Cisco Certified Network Associate Security training.
All of these, each grant is my understanding is each grant is a $2,000 stipend, so to speak, for continuing education for those employees involved in those trainings.
That is correct. And how the program works, it's a lesson in equity. So currently, we have a reimbursement policy with the city up to the same $2,000, but an employee has to front that money first. So what the state of Ohio does is encourages employers, pay for the training, and the state will reimburse you. So it releases that burden and removes a barrier for any employees looking to upskill. And I want to work with the supervisors in the Division of Water and Sewer to be able to select who would like to take this training. And as far as the network, our GIS specialist is excited about starting that journey.
Answer your question, Commissioner Poole?
Absolutely. Perfect.
And no out-of-pocket cost to us, my understanding.
Outside of the initial cost to pay for the training, which will be reimbursed.
Reimbursement.
So
What a good situation for us.
yeah, and there's many more certifications that we can take advantage of, city employees on every level. This is just dipping our toes in the water to see what we can do with these funds.
Anytime we invest in our employees, it's money well spent.
True story.
Thank you for pursuing that. Comments or questions for Mr. Harris, Commissioner? Ms. Myers, you call roll on that motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed, and that concludes our regular agenda. We'll turn to our city manager for his report.
Thank you, Commission President Brady, Commissioners, audience, and staff. I'll start with the donations. First, a donation of $250 for the K-9 account was received from Carol Wilson. I'd ask for a motion to accept that donation.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second discussion? Without objection, the motion be approved, and hearing no objection, that motion is approved with our thanks.
Great. Second, the Sandusky Fire Department was notified they were awarded a training bundle through the Ohio Board of Emergency Medical Services. The training bundle will include Preston Professional Child and Infant Mannequins and an airway management trainer. I'd ask for a motion to accept those donations.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second discussion? Without objection, that motion will be approved, and hearing no objection, that motion is approved also with our thanks.
Great. Moving on to new and old business. First, before I welcome our new IT manager, I do just want to give a special thank you to our exiting IT manager, Stuart Hamilton. It was over.
Yeah, really. It was over 6 years ago when we were doing a search for the city's first full-time IT manager, and Don Rambutis was doing a great job in his role, but we knew that this was an area, thank you to Don as well, we knew this was an area that we had underinvested in over time, and it was becoming increasingly important. And as we began interviews for an IT manager, we were really striking out with some of the applicants that we were bringing in for that position. And then in walked to the room, and I know Chief Warzek was there, I think Connie Nicholson was also there, this gentleman with a Scottish accent, which catches you by surprise in Sandusky in particular, and he interviewed so well, and we knew that we had to find a way to bring him in, which we did, and it was really evident early on in Stuart's tenure that he was much more than just an IT person. He did a great job with Don and Tiffany and the whole team, but from things as complex to moving into our new City Hall complex to, upgrading nearly every aspect of technology during such quickly changing times and really quickly changing city with the scale and the scope of what the city commission wanted to take on. So, Stuart, you've been much more than an IT manager for us, and you're going to have an opportunity to be much more than an IT manager in your new role as service director here on. We're glad you're going to be just down the road. Don't forget about us, because we certainly won't forget about you. Thank you. So. With that being said, we knew we had big shoes to fill, and Stuart was very gracious in helping us, along with Director Reeder, in leading the search for our new IT manager. And we were very fortunate that the talent pool this time around included Cody Browning, who's coming to us with over 13 years of IT experience. He's also lives regionally, locally. And we are very excited that Cody is joining the team. Cody, I'd hope you'd come up and give a brief introduction to yourself.
Hello, through the commission president. My name is Cody Browning. I'm a Clyde native. I've spent many hours here in Sandusky with my family. I'm excited for this role. I'm excited to come into a very strong IT team. In City of Sandusky itself, it's very progressive, cutting edge, no doubt due to the strong leadership of the commission and management. I've seen it grow a lot, but there's still a lot of work to be done, and I'm excited to get that done.
Welcome, Cody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome, Cody, and thanks for taking a chance on us. And Stuart, you certainly set us on the right course and set us on the right direction. Cody has some shoes to fill, but I also am pleased that you played a role in his selection. So I will continue to hold you responsible, and I know where you live.
As we all will.
I know where you live.
I'm okay with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome aboard, Cody. Moving on to the fire department. Due to the Erie County Emergency Management Agency restructuring its hazardous materials response approach, Sandusky Fire will be working with staff from Public Works to issue a request for proposals to purchase an 18-inch by 8.5-inch trailer to store the department's technical rescue equipment. For Public Works, we wanted to congratulate Oakland Cemetery Manager Dan Hedberg, who after 34 years of dedicated service to the city has announced that he will be retiring, and he will certainly be missed. We're going to work through the transition to figure out exactly how we'll take on Dan's roles, because he's been at the cemetery so long. But in the meantime, all inquiries can be directed to Elizabeth Sowecki in the Public Works Department at 419-627-5842, or E. Sowecki, that's ESOWECKE at ci.sandusky.oh.us. Also on March 7th, an unfortunate traffic accident occurred at the intersection of George Street and Route 101 and Venice Road, causing an outage. The equipment needed for the repairs has a 6 to 8 week lead time, so we don't anticipate installing the replacement until July or August. Temporary controllers have been installed for the time being. All costs associated with this repair will be billed to the driver's insurance company, but we are seeking emergency approval for the purchase of equipment in an amount not to exceed $60,000. I'd ask for a motion to make that emergency purchase.
So moved. Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. As we're spending money, Ms. Barnes, I'm going to ask you to poll the commission.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
That motion is passed. Thank you.
Next, in coordination with SPD, we're inviting members of the public who have lost a bicycle or had one stolen from a location in Sandusky to contact Public Works at 419-627-5884 no later than March 28th to possibly recover their property. Again, that's 419-627-5884. And Public Works, the police department, and recreation are working on an exciting program for what we can do with the excess bikes that we have, and it'll be exciting to hopefully bring that to you in the future, along with Sandusky Bay Cycles, a local nonprofit biking advocacy organization. Next, the Yard Waste program will run April 1st to December 31st. It's an optional service offered to city residents. If you receive the services as of December, you'll automatically re-up in the 2022 program. Anyone who would like to be added to the program or discontinue service, please contact customer accounting at 419-627-5893. Also, Ohio Edison would like to spread the word that payment assistance may be available to help residents facing financial hardship. Individuals interested in learning more can visit www.firstenergycorps.com/bill-assist or call 1-800-589-3101. Again, that's www.firstenergycorps.com/bill-assist or 1-800-589-3101. Additionally, Nick, a representative from First Energy, will be coming to City Commission on March 28th for anyone that has questions. For community development, the application for the beautification program is closed while the department is still approving applications. They're confident they received enough applications to fully commit to the allocated budget. Approved thus far 20 home purchase assistance applications, 5 substantial redevelopment applications, and 45 exterior repair applications. For recreation, the city's annual Easter egg hunt will be Saturday, April 16th at 10 a.m. at the Washington Park Gazebo. Those eggs go about as quickly as the housing grant program dollars, so I hope people show up by 10 a.m. as I've walked up late with my kids a few minutes late and missed it entirely, so make sure you're there by 10. The event will include a special appearance by the Easter Bunny arriving by fire truck. The event is in collaboration with Sandusky City Schools and Sandusky Rotary. For more information, follow Sandusky Rec on Facebook and Twitter or call 419-627-5886. And finally, the Mills Creek Golf Course will officially open on April 1st, but several bonus days have been added in March due to several days of mild weather. Anyone interested in information can follow the course on Facebook or call 419-627-5803. That concludes my remarks from this evening. I'm happy to take any questions or comments. Thank you.
Questions or comments for our city manager?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Meigs.
I can't hear well, and I should apologize because I know a couple of firefighters that probably could have answered this question before. But the trailer, is this less than 10,000, or is this something coming back to the commission? The purchase of the hazmat trailer?
Mario, do you want to take that?
Through President Brady to Commissioner Meiser, it's going to be a little over $10,000, so we're doing the RFP now with Public Works, and it's scheduled through the RFP to come April 11th meeting.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I didn't think you were going to get a deal that the police got on the cars.
Additional questions for city manager? Items of old business. Any items of old business, Commissioner? Items of new business. Any items of new business, Commissioner?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Murray.
Make a motion to set an executive session on the purchase and sale of real estate.
Second.
That form of a motion,
Second.
and that is a motion and a second discussion. Mr. Myers, do you poll the commission on that motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
That executive session is set. Additional items of new business, Commissioners. I have I would like to make a motion to appoint William Perry to the ADA Fair Housing Board where we have an opening. May I have a motion to appoint Mr. Perry?
So moved. Second.
Been a motion and second discussion. Ms. Myers, you poll the commission on that motion, please.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
That appointment is set. I would like to, under new business, I would like to read to you read into the record a letter that we received from our friends at Care and Share. Mr. Waddington furnished me with this just before our meeting tonight. Dear City Commissioners, words cannot express our gratitude for your continued support of Care and Share's mission. nurturing, and community is critical for the continued growth and success of Sandusky. This donation of $10,000 will greatly impact those in need in our area. A big, heartfelt thanks from all of us at Care and Share, and it is signed by several of their people. So I think that in the brief contact that I've had with Care and Share, I find that out of every dollar, they seem to get about $3. So that $10,000 will get stretched just about to the limit on providing for a lot of needy people in this area. We are blessed to be able to do this, and we're glad to have organizations like them to do it for. Any additional items of new business, Commissioners? Audience participation. Are there any public comments on any item that pertains to city business? Please step to the podium and share with us your name and address, and we'll write that into the record and credit you with that comment.
Bob Reardon, 401 West Shoreline Drive at the Chesapeake. On March the 8th, the city posted a small notice buried in the back of the Sandusky Register in the classifieds stating that Ohio Bike Week had filed a sound waiver for downtown Sandusky, Columbus Avenue, and the Jackson Street. This waiver requested unlimited sound from live bands and amplified equipment from 1 p.m. to 1 a.m. for June 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. I have responded to this request in writing to Lieutenant Dawn Allen of the Noise Control Administration as required. I have also notified other residents of Chesapeake Loft of this noise waiver request. However, I feel that any responses that are filed against this request will be buried in the city administration, and the city commission will never be aware of it. As you may or may not be aware, there are well over 100 residents on the east side of the Chesapeake. The ages of those folks run from babies to 85-year-olds. In addition, there are many dogs and cats residing on that side of the building. We have residents working different shifts, and some need to sleep during the hours proposed in the waiver request. All would be negatively affected by loud, booming rock band music being aimed directly at the Chesapeake as late as 1 a.m. I am sure that the members of the commission and the city manager would not like that to occur in your home and your neighborhood. I would like to thank Commissioner Blake Harris, who also happens to live in Chesapeake, who I followed up with when I saw this waiver request. He did follow up and indicated that he had talked with Severance from the Ohio Bike Week group, and Steve indicated that he did not plan to have any of those three areas playing as late as 1 a.m. The indication was that on the Jackson Street Pier, that should be ended at 11:30 p.m. But the problem with that is if there's any delays or any problems that they run over, they're particularly in their right to go ahead and go all the way to 1 a.m., assuming this waiver is going to be accepted. So it kind of kills the idea of the 11:30 ending there. They can do whatever they want up to 1 a.m. Last summer, the city decided that the Jackson Street Pier had to be the new home of a rock band stage in Sandusky with no regard to the residents. I communicated to Jason Whirling via email that the noise level was over the top, but he stated that it had to be that loud so that everyone could hear it. Please, when I asked if he couldn't have the stage and speakers turned so that they would face directly down the length of the pier instead of being angled toward the Chesapeake, he stated that it was angled to affect the most amounts of people. I realized then that it was futile to communicate anymore with him. He was set in stone, and that was that. Just for your information, last summer during the concerts, I could sit in the back of my condo as far from my closed windows as possible, watching TV with a headset on, and still hear the booming of the bass and drums from the stage. My guess is if the history of Bike Week performances prevails, it will be even louder than last summer's concerts. They will also be peppered with vulgar language as they were in 2019. I therefore ask the city to set some kind of decibel level for the Bike Week stage and require that those loud performances be ended no later than 11 p.m. I would think that you would want that in your neighborhood, wouldn't you? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reardon.
Hi, my name is Michael Kersey, and I reside at 1310 East Larchmont Drive. And I want to know what's going on with Cleveland Road and the Causeway. They talking about a roundabout, you know, and I think that's too much traffic on Cleveland Road, even in the winter, you know. And then with Cedar Point, it's gonna be it's a headache anyhow, you know. And I just want to know where you guys stand on that.
Where we stand on a roundabout?
Yeah, I read where in the paperwork, you know, the city was gonna be putting a roundabout right there on Cleveland Road and the Causeway.
This is not designed to be a question and answer session, but we will be more than happy to take your question.
Okay.
And we will pass that to to Mr. Klein.
All right.
And now that we have your name and address, I
Yes.
can assure you he'll communicate directly to you
Okay, then.
what that plan is.
All right, then, thank you then.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meigs.
is it appropriate that I comment?
Sure.
Okay. I used to play, should preface it with, I used to play street football with Mr. Kurtzy back in the 60s. And his brother Ulysses is a side.
70s.
No, I said.
You said 60s, he said 70s.
50s.
His brother Ulysses was fastest wideout at the barefoot, trust me. So anyway, and Mr. Reardon was up here, and I think the roundabout fear is, I remember the first time I ever went into a roundabout. I didn't even heard a roundabout. It was dark, and it was a thunderstorm, and I thought I got thrown into orbit. I'm like traveling, like, so I understand, and what I recognize is most of the people that have difficulty with roundabouts and noise and different things are usually my age, you know, or older, you know. So I just think that you can get a doctorate degree now probably in traffic control, so I don't know. I kind of agree with Michael. It makes me nervous is all that traffic coming into the city and trying to get in around that corner in the middle of on the 4th of July, but I'm just going to go with the trust with people that are educated and know that sort of thing. And whatever Mr. Klein tells me to do, I'm probably going to do it because I can't think of a good argument not to.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Poole.
Just question, Mr. Klein. The decision about roundabout, has it been made, done?
Mr. Klein.
Through the president, it has been made that the roundabout is the best to improve traffic at that intersection. I will say that at the next meeting, Josh Schneider is intending to be here with the next phase of the Cleveland Road roundabout discussion for the next phase of that contract. So if there are questions from anybody, that would be a great meeting to attend and ask him or talk to him beforehand.
So you'll have the experts here at the next meeting. Excellent.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, just to follow up with regard to roundabouts, I do find them, yes, where we stand, that roundabouts that are designed properly to accomplish some specific things are beneficial. And I hope at the next meeting, when we get the description, you'll be able to ask questions and perhaps you'll allow your fears. While I have the floor with regard to the noise, it seems reasonable that the request, if it's for 11:30, that would pretty much not resolve the problem completely, that would go a long way in making the residents pretty at least satisfied that we're making an effort to consider their concerns. It does seem a stretch that, considering the way sound waves go out, that bouncing it off the building of Chesapeake is absolutely necessary for people to hear it on the grass. So the concept of we can't redirect the stage seems a bit of a stretch.
Redirect the speakers?
Yeah, speakers or whatever. I mean, that, for us to deny them that, and if that's actually what occurred, it seems to defy anything that requires science, unless we're sending
I think it might be appropriate perhaps to ask the law department to perhaps review we have a contract with Advantage Entertainment for that event, and perhaps we can ask the law department to review that and see if we are locked into any specific time frame, or if we have the ability to curtail those hours at any point. I'm not asking you to be aware of the answer to that question now, Mr. Heil, but perhaps we could look into that and see what we can do as far as sound goes.
Sure, and it's actually, we have been in some discussion with Advantage Entertainment about Bike Week, about revising and modernizing the current ordinance that serves as the contract with that entity. And if it's commission's prerogative, we can look into some hours and other things, and we would be bringing, any changes would have to come before you as well for discussion and vote.
Is it too late to do that for this year? Are we up against a deadline, or where are we at?
No, there's still time for this year. They're under a current agreement that allows them to continue, and if we make a modification to that, it would just simply replace any pending agreement.
Mr. Chairman, I'm a little unclear on what the agreement is. I assume if they've applied for a waiver that limiting how much noise they make, we have the ability to do that. So I'm not sure where you're going with this modification.
Just a point for clarification, there are two things. There's a noise waiver application, and then that we also have a current ordinance governing our contractual agreement with Bike Week. I don't know off the top of my head if that specifies what hours they can operate. I believe it does.
That's what I was referring to.
Yeah.
Okay, which is fine. Wait to hear from you.
Sure.
Greetings, Tom Lamarca, 206 48th Street. Again, I want to congratulate Mr. Webster and the commission on the Cedar Fair $50 million taxing deal that will eventually provide some beach access for the residents and tourists alike via the widened causeway. I'm guessing that Cedar Point will charge our residents to go over that causeway for parking, because they don't know that the city owns a parking lot over there to use that beach. And by the way, the parking's going to $25 this year, and many of our residents won't be able to afford the $25 to go use the beach. So with that in mind, today was a great day to go over to Lions Park and take a look at the beach that's actually there and rebuilding itself, and it could use a little more help from the city if you could connect with the Corps of Engineers and the ODNR and see about rebuilding the existing wall that runs out straight out north, perhaps, and then I know there's another wall out there offshore as a breakwater to capture the sands that are flowing. Now, someone did remark to me that there's a raw sewage outlet somewhere in that Lions Park area, and I think if that's true, that's a violation of EPA. I don't think that we have anything like that, but if you happen to know of that, I'd like to see that get remedied. Also, congrats to Debbie Eversole and her staff on getting an abundance of applications for the $400,000 grants available for the beautification, modification, and housing loan or housing grants for purchases for owner-occupied properties. I understand that a fourth of the $400,000 or $100,000 is being dedicated to purchases. And I appreciate that, because we need more homeowners within the city. With all the money that was spent this evening, I would like to see that you find a way to throw maybe another $100,000 into that pool of funds so that we can have more buyers owning property. And again, you know, buyers turn into city income taxpayers. So that's a good thing, and it adds to our population. It keeps us at the 25,000 level for all the other federal grants. So if we could work with that. And then additionally, I want to go back to Bike Week and the Pier for a second. The Jackson Street Pier, I mentioned last year that there were some eye bolts sticking out of the east wall of the Jackson Street Pier. And while that construction was going on, I don't know why they didn't whack those off. I mean, they extend out 10, 12, 14 inches. And so if someone were to tie their boat up there to enjoy the bands on the pier, those eye bolts are going to rip their boats apart. So we should have taken care of that when we had ice out there and could have cut them off standing on the ice. But now we're going to have to pay for a barge. But I think that needs some attention. Then, most importantly, Russia invading Ukraine. And across the world, and even in this chamber, we've taken a moment of silence for the people of Ukraine and what's happening with the atrocities of Russia. I'm no historian, but a week or so ago, a vigil was held in our park downtown, and the local group held it, and there were a couple of hundred citizens there and different speakers. And then along with the speakers that were there, State Representative Marcy Kaptur appeared. Now, I think that's great that we have a state representative come into our city to take the time to come to our city, because she's pretty busy. I don't know her personally. I didn't vote for her, but she took her time to come to the city. And we had a number of city dignitaries that attended this vigil, and I appreciate that, but I didn't see any of them greet the state representative or make a small presentation to the group that was there. And I thought that, you know, that could have been done. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lamarca.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Ashburn. I'm at 2112 Parkview Boulevard in Sandusky. It's known as MacArthur Park. About 5 months ago, the city came out and tore down 2 buildings in MacArthur Park. Previously, when you tore down the buildings, they then seeded the land and they leveled the land out. That hasn't been done. So we have 2 areas that are muddy with tire tracks from the large vehicles that came to tear down the buildings, and it's causing, it's just 2 big muddy places there that the city could repair, and I'm asking for that. Also, the streets in MacArthur Park are neglected. Somebody came out and patched a few of them, and those patches are already coming up. So for the people that live in MacArthur Park that are a part of Sandusky, we need more attention to be paid to the neighborhoods. There's a Southside Stakeholders Committee that's being formed. I sent my name in that I would like to be a part of that to help revitalize the neighborhoods that are sorely in need of attention from the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ashburn.
Good evening. Matt Ames of 2204 Mill Street. As a resident of the Southside neighborhood, I would like to publicly welcome our new neighbor, the pastors and congregation of the Father's Heart Family Church, formerly St. Paul's Lutheran. I had an opportunity to attend the ribbon-cutting ceremony service last Saturday, and it was good to see many of our city commissioners there to support them as well. After learning about their outreach programs and dedication to the community service in town, there's no doubt that they're going to be a welcomed addition to our neighborhood. I'd like to thank all that were involved with the facilitation of helping this congregation find their new home on Mill Street, and encourage other residents, both in my neighborhood and extended community, to stop by and attend their service and get involved with their mission to service here in Sandusky.
Thank you, Mr. Ames.
Tim Schwanger, 362 Sheffield Way. I was able to ask the Finance Department for the documents that would show where we can spend our $18 million in COVID relief, and she was kind enough to send me a link. And I sent her an email back, I believe, maybe she hadn't gotten it yet, asking if it would be on the city's website. And I think that it's imperative that we get that link on the city's website so that every resident of Sandusky can see where we can spend our money on that. I'd also encourage, I don't know if you're going to form a committee on where to spend that money, but I would suggest that if you do, that you include residents and businesses in each one of our 6 neighborhoods under the neighborhood initiative to get the residents involved in also the spending of that money. Under the CDBG grant for 2022, I don't know if you're all aware of this or not, but a few years ago, the West End was taken out of any CDBG money availability. So I'd like to see, and I don't know why that was taken out. I guess maybe we felt that there were too many rich people living out in the West End. I'm not really too sure. But it would be nice to be able to put some of that money back into get the West End back into that program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwanger.
Mr. Chairman, before we leave, is somebody here that can clarify the last question about who's eligible for CDBG funds? I think before we get any further. This commission
may.
didn't take anybody out.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but if you have that answer.
No,
that's
sure. I didn't see it back there.
She looks
so I
ready
didn't-
for it.
Yeah, because it's important people understand. We didn't take anybody out of anything.
Sure. So the eligible areas are determined by the census.
Census.
Yes, and that's done, I believe, every 5 years. They change with our comprehensive plan, so.
That would be the federal.
Consolidated plan.
That would be the federal
Yes.
government census?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you.
Before you go, is that census tied to how much money the people make in the area? Is that how it's tied? Or
I'm sorry, I didn't hear part of it.
is it tied to money?
Is it tied to
tied to-
money?
yeah.
It's tied by income, I believe.
Okay, you didn't say so. I wanted you to be clear for the public so they understand that the census data based on income in a given area dictates that, not the city commission.
Good, thank you.
I knew you knew, but I wanted you to have the opportunity to say it.
Good answer. There are no further public comments. We will,
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Meigs?
I just want to comment on a couple of things that would save staff. One, I think on Mrs. Washington was the grass is like, I'm sure that the Public Works will take care of that as soon as it starts warming up. It wasn't a good time to plant grass over the winter, so that'll take care of that, I'm sure. And then the other thing is in the West End, Mr. Lamarca commented on, was some sort of maybe overflow sewage out there, and he made me recollect an incident. I'm not aware of an overflow sewage out there. Mr. Klein might know, but there is a drain pipe out there that was related to AlMag when we did Trojan powder, not Trojan, but aluminum magnesium during World War II munitions, and there's a lot of hazardous material buried in that area, and we had a leak a few decades ago that hazardous material was in the bay, and we did find a pipe that went back to some factory back up towards Venice Road somewhere in there. So he's not wrong, but back then that's pre-computers, EPA was pretty new, so everybody was notified, but I'm not sure the source was ever found. So there's some old skeletons laying in Sandusky from the industrial age. I just wanted to comment on the two things.
We will recess to executive session. Commissioners, we're going to stay here for the executive session.
Perfect.
What a luxury.
My dad.
Hey, Mike, I'm sure it's good to see us.
Pardon?
Sewer overflow.
your chair rail and your freaking wallpaper picked out. You have nothing else to do. I've had a lot of guys went to here and be firemen too. They regretted it.
I think a lot of people went to here and they died, nobody noticed.
Mike, when you returned from executive session, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved.